Hello and welcome to a pre-recorded Speakers for Schools virtual talk. We're delighted to announce that we have Soumaya Keynes. Today, she'll be speaking about her role as an economist and the need for diversity in economics. This talk would be suitable for Key Stage 5 or S5 to 6, or those studying economics or considering a career in economics. Thank you, and over to Soumaya.
Hello. I'm Soumaya Keynes. So I was introduced as an economist, and there are a lot of economists in my job title. I work at The Economist. I actually cover trade and globalization for The Economist magazine. But I'm actually so I'm a journalist because I write about economics for The Economist. And just to give you a bit of background about myself, when I was really little, I wanted to be a librarian because I thought I could read books all the time. Then I wanted to be a singer because why not? Then a mathematician. And then I decided I wanted to be an investment banker so that I could get really, really rich and then retire when I was 30 and start my own theatre company. So then I decided to become an economist at some point along the line. So essentially I studied economics. I did a master's in economics. I went to work at the Treasury. My job was basically, I was a government policy advisor. So I was helping the government decide what its policy should be about things called building societies, which are a kind of a sort of special kind of bank, but not really a bank. And it was great. I loved the Treasury, except the word economist wasn't in my job title. And I really wanted to be an economist. I thought of myself as an economist. I think of myself as an economist. And so not too long after working there, I basically applied for my dream job at somewhere called the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And there I was working on research, I was working with data. It was really, really nerdy. I was basically in economics heaven. And then sort of somewhere along the line, I made it, one second, if you meant to have this, somewhere along the line, I made it to The Economist. Right, so now I'm a journalist, I'm an economics journalist. I've been at The Economist for 5 years now. I've actually been living in America for the past 2. So I'm giving this talk out of Washington, D.C., the land of Donald Trump. And in my role, covering economics, writing about economists and economics, one thing I've really been thinking about, particularly recently, is the issue of diversity within economics, right? So I'm kind of on the outside, and I'm able to look at this profession and ask, what is going on here, and just to give a sense of why this matters. I think economics is really cool. It's great. It's people pay attention to economists. That's nice if you are one. And you're taken quite seriously, right? The government kind of wants your opinion on things, on how to do things. The IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, it was taken very seriously. So I think it matters who economists are, and it matters the kinds of things that they're thinking about and advising on and what they're saying. And so if you think that economists are important, then there's a worrying fact about economists, right? Which is that economists are not very diverse, right? They don't, who they are doesn't really reflect the society as a whole that they're kind of working on and trying to understand. And so a lot of my work here at The Economist has been thinking about whether that might be a problem, and why it might be the case. Okay, so whenever I talk about this, I always say at this point, close your eyes and imagine an economist, right? And the person who probably pops into your head is a white dude. Our friend here, the white dude from clip art. And you know, if you Google economists, then you're going to get a bunch of other white dudes, and you know, there are a lot of them around. And you know, when it comes to the most famous economists, famous, you know, kind of mainstream economists that everyone has taught about, yeah, there are a lot of white dudes. Historically, you know, mainstream celebrated economists have been pretty male, and they've been pretty white. So I guess, you know, if there's one thing I wanted you to take away from this talk, is that you don't have to be a white dude to be an economist. You can be kind of all sorts of, you know, there are all sorts of economists out there who don't look like a white dude. You know, and so here's just you know, an assortment of economists that I know who are not white dudes. So you know, please take that, you know, lesson from this. Now, the fact remains that the people on this slide are not, you know, they're not the majority. There are still, you know, arguably there are not enough people who look like them in the profession, and you know, we're economists, right? I'm trained as an economist, and you know, this topic, it should be really in my wheelhouse, right? I'm an economist. I think about the labor market for economists, right? This is an economics problem. Why are people doing this job of economist? Why are some people not there, right? Why are some people not choosing to go in, or why are some people being shut out? Okay, so now we're going to do some Econ 101, and sorry about this. I know that, you know, this isn't kind of billed as an economics lesson, but sorry. So basically, I'm going to try and give you, you know, put yourself in the shoes of an economist thinking about this labor markets problem, right? So the mystery is, why are there not more women or people who aren't white in economics right now? Okay, and as an economist, when thinking about this kind of problem, you might think about three possible things, right? So number one, it could be preferences, right? Maybe people just don't like, maybe some people just don't like economics. Maybe they like doing other things. Maybe they don't like maths, right? And that kind of puts them off. Maybe they prefer, you know, psychology or something like that. Now, number two, alternatively, it could be that their productivity, right? And so what I mean by this is maybe they would quite like to be in economics, maybe they're just not very good at it, right? Maybe there's just something about them that means that they're just not as good at economics as other people. You know, maybe to be a successful economist, what matters is your ability to write in top economic journals, right? You know, maybe some groups are, you know, they're not as good at maths at the point at which they're, you know, entering economics. Maybe that's holding them back. Or number three, prejudice, right? That's the third possible explanation for what's going on. And so, you know, maybe some people face constraints. Maybe some people would love to go into economics. Maybe they're just as good at economics as other people, but they're being shut out, right? Maybe they're just not being given the opportunities to go into this discipline. And you know, and so there I'm talking about discrimination, sexism, racism, you know, those kinds of problems. So, you know, we're economists, right? And so we have these three explanations, and obviously it matters what's going on, right? It matters because it matters, you know, what you try to do to fix it, right? If some people just don't like economics, then some might say, fine, they'll be happy doing other things. It's not our problem. Alternatively, if it's prejudice, then it's clearly very, very important to make sure that everyone is allowed in, right? It's very important to dismantle those barriers to people. If it's productivity, then, you know, that's a different kind of issue to fix. You might try different things to get at that. And, you know, I guess if you're some people within the profession, you might think, well, if it's number 1 or 2, if it's just that they don't like it or they're not as good at it, then maybe there's just not much we can do about that, right? Maybe that's just too difficult to fix, and perhaps they might think that they shouldn't try. Now, I don't subscribe to that view, but that is one of the ways that one might interpret those. Okay, so before we go on, this is my kind of exclamation point slide. Before we go on, I want to give 2 warnings and a caveat, right? So warning number one. Warning number one is that when we're thinking about this, we really need to be careful of something called motivated reasoning, right? And so this is the idea that basically, as humans, as people, we believe things that we want to believe are true, right? And so when approaching a problem, it's important to try and, think about what you want to be true and to try and distance yourself from that and think about things kind of analytically, right? So I guess one worry might be that, if you were doing your thing and you're seeing others succeed while you're not, you might be more inclined to blame the system, to blame someone else, than to examine, what you're doing, right? So I'm not saying that is going on, but one needs to be really, really careful about it when kind of thinking about issues of discrimination and so on. So the second warning is that, we need to put this in context, right? So, there are some barriers to people that were horrendous, that were there, that have been there in the past, right? And some of those explicit barriers have been dismantled, right? So it's not the case that people face exactly the same barriers that they did 20 years ago. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't still barriers today, right? It just means that the barriers that we might be looking for are going to be more subtle, and they're going to be harder to find than the barriers that were in existence decades ago, when sometimes people were, literally barred from doing certain things in the profession. And today I think, many will say that, in some institutions, people are really looking for diversity, so looking to promote diversity, right? So one needs to, bear in mind that there are many people out there who are trying to do really good things, and who kind of want to support people as they come up through the pipeline. The third kind of caveat is that people are different, right? That sounds really obvious, but people have different experiences. They have different constraints. So, one thing that has been, highlighted is that, Black women and Black men may face a different set of constraints generally in the workplace, right? One, as far as one should try to consider different groups separately, right? If you're a Black woman, then you might have the burden of your race, but also the burden of your gender. And so you really need to think about those things. Now, with all of that in mind, the final thing to say before I get on to, the actual kind of what we know, is that this is really hard, right? This is really, really hard. The evidence base out there isn't as good as we would like, right? There's a lack of data in some cases. There's a lack of people looking into what exactly is going on. People have been looking into what's going on, but it's just a really hard exercise. And this hasn't been, priority number one for the profession, over the last decade, for example, right? And so there's definitely more work that we need to do to work out what exactly is going on here. Okay, so that's it. There is evidence out there, and there are some things that we can say. Paper number one that I want to cite, or kind of study number one, is by Arun Advani, Rachel Griffith, and Sarah Smith. You can see who they are. And so that the first hint we have is that people seem to be turning away from economics pretty early on, right? So if you look at the number of A-level entries, really it starts very early, right? So it's sort of already when you're 16, boys are taking economics at a much higher rate than girls, right? And I don't, many of you will I guess have your own experiences of what goes on in your classrooms. So basically we've got here women are dropping out of economics very early on. They're saying, you know what, we're not into this. Now part of the issue is that A-level, there's another issue. We're talking about this chart shows gender diversity. There are other kinds of diversity that matter too. The same study basically points out that A-level economics isn't offered in a bunch of schools. You're much more likely to be offered it if you're in a private school. And so, the worry is that although you definitely don't have to do A-level economics to go on to be an economist, right? You can do economics at university without having A-level economics. But the worry is that that people don't consider it, right? And it is a signal, I suppose, that you're interested. Now you can explain a bit of the gap between young men and young women by the fact that women do seem to arrive at university with slightly worse maths qualifications than men, very slightly, right? But I feel like in general, thinking about this literature, the maths thing is overstated, right? It's a small thing, but the gaps that you see are too big to be able to be explained by that maths thing. And as a lady maths nerd, there's nothing holding you back from being good at maths if you're really into that. Okay, so given how early this is happening, it looks like maybe this could be something to do with preferences, right? So maybe women don't like the fact that economics is really abstract. Maybe they associate economists with male-dominated professions. Maybe they think, oh, you know what, economics is all to do with finance. Like, I'm not that keen. There are some other clues, right? There are some other hints about what might be a problem. So I'm going to at this point, I'm going to switch to America, right? There's a lot more evidence on what's going on in America, where you basically have a similar kind of problem, right? And so, I know we're not in America, or you're not in America, but just bear with me as I give you the evidence from the US. Okay, so there was this other study by Betsy Stevenson and Hannah Slotnick that looked at who was being mentioned in textbooks, right? And so what they did is they basically just counted all the mentions of economists in textbooks, and surprise, surprise, 92% of the mentions were of men. Now, this may not be surprising given who I said at the beginning was, in the mainstream economics, but the worry is that people could be getting the message that economics isn't for them, right? The economists who seem to be in the discipline don't look like them. It doesn't seem to be that inclusive, and somehow maybe through that they're being put off, or they don't have role models. And so, for a long time, economics has been a man's subject. Now, so I haven't got a chart of race here, but my assumption, and I would love for someone to prove me wrong, my assumption is that many of the economists mentioned in textbooks are going to be white, right? So this also applies to race, and the number of Black women or women of ethnic minorities is also going to be very small, right? So this is a kind of a challenge, right, to the economist's framework at the beginning, because I said maybe it's preferences or maybe it's constraints. Now, if the fact that people aren't being shown a diversity of people, right, does that count as that might shape your preferences, right? That might influence what you think economics is, or whether you like economics. But maybe that's also a kind of constraint. Maybe you're being sent a message that this subject isn't for you, right? And other people are not being sent that message. The white men are not being sent that message, and that maybe that makes them more likely to go on, right? And so when thinking about these kind of nuggets, these bits of evidence, you need to be really careful about where they go, right? You need to, you know, don't just assume that, oh, that's preferences, right? Because it could be that it's more complicated than that. Okay, so the next kind of nugget or piece of evidence on what might be contributing to the lack of diversity in economics is, again, it's about gender and it's based in the US. So this is a kind of complicated paper, and I won't go into all of the details, but this one is by Heather Sarsens. She basically what she did is she looked at, this is looking at senior economists, right? And she looked at senior economists' chances of getting tenure. So they're getting a permanent job as an economist at an American university. And what she did is she looked at what happened when an economist wrote a paper, right? And she found that something funny was going on, right? When women who were writing papers on their own, they were getting credit for them, right? You write an extra paper, your chances of getting a job promotion goes up. When they were writing papers with other people, their chances of promotion weren't going up by anywhere near as much as when men were writing papers with other people, right? It's quite common to write papers with other people in economics, to collaborate on stuff. When a man wrote a paper with someone else, he was getting a bump. He was getting an extra chance of getting promoted. When a woman was doing it, she wasn't getting nearly as much credit, right? And so the conclusion is that maybe these women are being set higher standards than the men, right? People are looking at these papers saying, we don't know who did all the work, but we're going to assume that the woman didn't do the work, right? And we're not going to give her credit for this paper, this piece of work that she did, right? And so there, you know, the takeaway here is that, you know, you might say, oh, well, look, we've got this measure of productivity, right? Sorry, hang on. I've got a little intervention from my kitten, which is he's very cute, but he's going to leave now. Okay. So, right. So you might think, oh, okay, well, we've got this measure of productivity, right? Like, how many papers have we written, right? But then you need to think really carefully about how you're interpreting those measures of how good someone is at economics. You know, again, we've got this kind of fuzziness, right? Where do these things fit in our framework? Okay, so we've got another study which is kind of along similar lines, right? So this one's by Erin Hengel, and what she does is she looks at papers published by men and women, and then she basically measures how well written they are, right? And she, again, finds something really weird and really funny. So she finds that economics papers written by women are easier to read than papers written by men. So this is weird, right? Now, we know that actually on average, women tend to write fewer papers than men. And so, you know, the danger is you might think, oh, okay, well, they're not as good at economics. They're not writing so many papers, right? But Erin's paper, this study, suggests that something worrying is going on, right? It suggests that maybe the women, and sorry, this is another paper about women and not other, you know, elements of diversity. Maybe the women are having to write better to get their articles published. Maybe they're being set higher standards and it's harder for them to show that they are good at economics, right? And so again, you have this confusion, right? Is it productivity or is it constraints? Okay. Hang on, just gonna catch up with my notes. Right, so, okay, I'm gonna kind of stop rambling very soon, but you know, there are a few kind of takeaways from all of this, right? So one is, as economists, we're given a framework. It's super useful, right? We are rewarded for having this very clear way of thinking. But as economists, we also have our own biases, right? We also need to be super, super careful about how we're treating the evidence that is in front of us, right? Like I'm a human. We're all human. We all have our biases, right? These economists that I've put on the screen now, they're not random, right? I didn't just randomly pick them. I have been in the same room with them or spoken to all of them. You know, some of them are my friends, right? It's we all have, we all are influenced by the people we know in ways that are kind of harder for us to uncover, right? And so, that is kind of why diversity is so important, because we need a diversity of experiences, right? It would be worrying if everyone had the same small networks that looked exactly like each other. But one also needs to kind of check your biases and make sure that you are thinking kind of outside the box, right? I think everyone on this screen would agree with me that good economics is about questioning your assumptions. It's about embracing lots and lots of different ideas, and only by hearing all of those different ideas and thoughts can you really work out, what do I really think about this? Yeah, so I think, if there was another thing, this is what, one final thing that I'd want you to take away from this is that economics it's fun because it's really hard, right? It's really hard and it's really complicated. Out there in the real world, it's really hard to know what exactly is going on, but it matters. And it's easier to get there if we have lots and lots of different people all trying to work it out. So this is kind of a risky talk to give, because the danger is that you come away from it thinking, oh God, economics sounds terrible. It's just a load of white dudes. I don't want anything to do with that, right? But I would sort of beg you not to think about that, right? I would beg you to sort of look at the people on the screen, think, yeah, I like maybe I could be in that little white box. In the UK, there's this initiative called Discover Economics. So you can kind of Google that. But there are initiatives underway, people trying to make this a broader field, and I think trying to make economics better. And so with that, I will go on to my next slide, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Soumaya, for your fascinating insight into diversity and economics. And it really was interesting to look at the evidence that these professors found and then to analyse it. And I just wanted to ask you, because you said that A-level economics is not essential for a economics degree. So what would you say are the key kind of A-levels or courses that students should be doing in order to get a degree?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on the university that you're interested in doing, and often they'll publish requirements, right? And so, as someone who's been living in the US for the last couple of years, I'm kind of, you should definitely go out and look to see what the requirements are. In terms of what helped me, I mean, at many universities, it does help to do maths, right? It is a quantitative subject. Part of the fun about economics is looking at data, seeing what the numbers tell you, going out and looking at what's going on in the world. So one shouldn't pretend that it doesn't involve lots of maths. But at different institutions there's different amounts of maths, right? And so you can kind of choose depending on what your interests are. So I was a super maths nerd, and I'm kind of weird in that respect. So don't think that you have to follow exactly what I did. But other A levels that I think I saw my compatriots doing that I thought were really useful are kind of history, politics, those kinds of things. Economics is really a study of the real world, right? And so it helps to have a broader understanding of what the real world looks like and how we got here. And so there's that. But also, if you're interested in economics, then you're not constrained by what you're taught in school, right? I'm sure you'll have like smartphones and access to the internet and stuff. Discover Economics has a bunch of resources on what it means to do economics. Read the news. Just work out what you're interested in. And if you're interested in the big changes that are happening right now in this crazy world, then chances are that economics has something to do with that.
Amazing, thank you. And who or what first got you interested in economics? Was there a particular inspiration for you to go and study that?
Yeah, so I have a confession, which is that I don't think I started economics really understanding what it was. So I think, I said right at the beginning, I wanted to be an investment banker so I could get lots of money and then retire when I was 30 and join a theatre company. So I think I thought economics was all about money and finance and that kind of stuff. And, I thought it was, a great, more real world way to use maths. And I'm kind of a bit embarrassed by that now, because but I'm also extraordinarily lucky, right? Because in doing the subject and kind of following it through, I learned how it was so much more than that, right? It was about, it was about decisions that affect people's lives, right? It's about, fundamentally it's about who gets what in the world, right? Which is super, super interesting. So, I studied things like minimum wages. Here at The Economist, I've written about amazing things, right? I've written about why lesbians get paid more than straight women. I've written about the economics of quinoa or feminist economics. I now in America, right? I'm writing about Donald Trump and trade and the trade wars. It's super, super interesting and exciting. And kind of not really about, it's sort of about money insofar as money is a measure of who gets what, but I don't think very much at all about banking and finance, which is I think what I thought it was at the beginning.
Excellent, right. So it's so much more than banking and finance. It's sort of about applying economics to the real world and sort of real stories and getting behind the interesting subjects that you mentioned. So, well, I think that sort of covers about why young people should be interested, because it is about the real world. And of course, if you take a passion in economics, it could mean you can travel, as you said. You're living in America, amazing.
But what's going on at the moment, shall we say? But yeah,
you could travel with the degree. But what aspects of your role do you enjoy the most?
Yeah, so again, I'm in a strange position. When I was working as a research economist at the Institute for Fiscal Studies, I would do these very long-term, deep projects, right? Whereas now I basically am answering a different question every week. And so I'm doing this little mini, I'm writing an essay every week, right? But I get to talk to whoever I want to, and I get to find out things that I'm really, really interested in, right? And so one, it's the kind of freedom to explore the world and ask difficult questions of people in a sort of challenging way. I think the other thing I really enjoy is just discovering complexity, right? Discovering how everything is different, right? So I think sometimes one can kind of you have a model in your head of how the world works, right? And then you apply that way of thinking to lots and lots of different circumstances. And one of the funnest things I found is when you apply a model, when you apply a way of thinking to a particular situation, the fun bits are sort of asking, okay, well, why is this wrong, right? Why does this not apply? What are the particular circumstances in this case that means it's not that relevant? There's kind of a joke about, I think it's a three-handed economist, or whenever you talk to an economist, you'll get at least two opinions. It's something along those lines. And so there's a kind of, I think often people have a slight frustration with economists because they're too prone to saying, well, it depends. But one of the best bits is to be able to explain why it depends, right? No, it really does depend, right? The world is really complicated. People are really complicated. Something tried in one place isn't necessarily going to work in another place. And it's just kind of cool to try and understand why.
That does sound really interesting about, your job is to ask all these hard questions and the why, which is really interesting. But on the other hand, what challenges do you face in your role, and how do you overcome them?
Sure. So, I came up through economics, and I'm now a writer, right? So I write about economics, and I think the one thing that I regret is not sort of pursuing the writing part earlier on, and so what I mean by that is, I did no essay subjects when I was in A level, and it's kind of crazy that I'm now writing for a living. But so I guess number one, writing and good communication matters in anything that I have done. And I think, to be honest, I found writing quite challenging, right? To kind of good, clear writing is hard. And it requires a lot of work, right? There are some people out there in the world who, and many of them are my colleagues, and it's very annoying, who are amazing at writing something that's brilliant the first time, right? They can just write something and it's great on that first attempt. I'm not like that, right? As a writer, I'm just not built that way, right? It takes me rounds of editing, it takes me multiple drafts to get something good. And so I think, I found writing challenging, and it's quite easy to get disheartened, right? And so I guess part of overcoming it has just been about telling myself that just because you find something hard, it doesn't mean you're not good at it, right? So like I write for a living, I'm a good writer. That doesn't mean I find it easy, and that's okay. Right? And I think that applies to almost anything, right? Just because you find something difficult at first, it doesn't mean that you're not capable of getting there or of achieving something that is really, really good. It's just something that requires work and practice and effort, and overcoming it has just required putting those in.
That's amazing. And yes, I'm sure a lot of young people will appreciate you saying that, not everything is perfect on the first writing of it. It needs editing, it needs redrafting and things like that, which is really useful. So one last question for the young people that would like to get into economics, what can they be reading, studying or doing now?
Yeah, so read the news. Just read about what's going on. I mentioned Discover Economics, so that's kind of a resource designed to explain to folks what economics is really about. I guess I work for The Economist. I probably should plug The Economist. So read The Economist magazine, of course, my employer. Listen to things as well. So again, this is a shameless advert, but as well as writing for The Economist, I have a podcast. And there are all sorts of podcasts out there, ways to listen to people talk about economics in hopefully an engaging way. So my podcast is called Trade Talks. It's about trade. It's about trade. It's really, really about trade. So you may not want to listen to every single episode, but that can give you a taste of what it's like and what the kinds of things that people are thinking about within the subject. There are a bunch of other economics podcasts out there. If you Google economics podcasts, then that's that. I think Tim Harford, who writes for the Financial Times, actually had a list of good economics podcasts quite recently. So if you just search for that on the internet, then that's a good resource. Some of my favorite books have been about economic history. So there's one called Grand Pursuits by Sylvia Nassar that kind of goes through the lives of these great economists and essentially points out that they were all products of their time, right? She describes the situation that they were living in and explains, oh well, that's how they came to their views, right? Which helps you understand how we've got the economics that we have today, right, and also kind of criticize it. That may be something for a little bit later in your economics career, but I know I enjoyed it. And then the other thing is, there are a lot of really boring economics books out there. So don't get discouraged if you start trying to read, Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, and you're like, whoa, this is a difficult read, right? I think just trying lots and lots of different things, searching on the internet for podcasts and good introductory economics books. And if you don't like one, just try a different one. It might not be economics, it might just be the way it's written.
Amazing, excellent. I do think the first step is also to listen to this talk. So thanks so much for your time, Soumaya. Thanks everyone for listening, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we see you at the next talk. Thank you.
Thank you.